The day I earned my doctorate, my mother was not in the audience. She was in the backyard, beaming beside my brother's grill. But that humiliation was not the hardest hit. Months later, I found out my family was using my academic title and signature to build a multi-million-dollar barbecue empire. This time, I refused to cry in the bathroom. I walked straight onto their stage and brought it all crashing down before everyone. My name is Charlie Mendoza. I am 29 years old, and as I stood in the drafty staging hallway of the university arena, I believed that today, finally, I would be enough. I was about to walk across the stage to receive my doctorate in labor policy and public contracting systems. It had taken me years of sleepless nights, countless cups of bitter coffee, and endless hours analyzing dry legal texts and bureaucratic loopholes to earn the heavy velvet hood draped over my shoulders. The fabric felt like a physical manifestation of my worth. For once, I thought, my family would sit in the audience, look at the stage, and choose me. I kept glancing at the heavy wooden doors leading to the main auditorium. The dull roar of thousands of proud parents, grandparents, and siblings echoed through the corridor. I clutched my phone inside the pocket of my black gown, waiting for the familiar ping. I expected a frantic message from my mother asking for directions to parking section C, or a text from my father complaining about the uncomfortable stadium seating. I had reserved 4 premium seats for them months in advance. Section 4, Row G, dead center. The perfect vantage point to see the dean shake my hand. The line of graduates shifted forward. The alphabetical order meant the M section was getting dangerously close to the entrance. I checked my screen again. Nothing. The anxiety in my chest began to curdle into a familiar, sour dread. Exactly 10 minutes before my name was scheduled to be called over the arena loudspeakers, my phone vibrated against my thigh. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling slightly. It was a text from my mother. "We are at Dean's right now. It is so crowded. Sweetie, we just cannot leave." I stopped breathing. The air in the hallway suddenly felt impossibly thin. I stared at the glowing letters, trying to force them to arrange themselves into a different sentence, a joke, a mistake. But then the second message loaded. It was a photograph. There it was. The sprawling backyard of our family home in Belmere. The space was transformed into a chaotic, festive carnival of smoke and string lights. At the center of the frame stood my older brother, Dean Mendoza. He was wearing his signature leather apron, throwing his head back in a booming laugh, holding a pair of heavy metal tongs like a royal scepter. Behind him, the massive custom smoker was billowing thick, hickory-scented clouds. Surrounding him was a crowd of local businessmen, holding plastic cups of craft beer and plates piled high with ribs. It was a catering pitch. Dean had been trying to lock down local investors for his barbecue business for months, and apparently, he had chosen today, my graduation day, to host his grand audition. Panic and a desperate, childish need for attention hijacked my brain. I broke the strict silence rule of the staging area and dialed my mother's number. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Mom," I whispered fiercely, pressing the phone hard against my ear to drown out the graduation march playing over the speakers. "Where are you?" "They are lining us up for the stage right now." Loud country music and the sizzle of meat assaulted my ear through the receiver. "Charlie, honey," my mother said, her voice strained and distracted. "I just texted you. We are swamped here. The investors showed up early, and your brother needs all hands on deck." "It is my doctoral graduation," I said, my voice cracking in a way I hated. "You promised you would be here. I reserved the seats." "Oh, Charlie, please do not make a big deal out of this," she sighed, the irritation bleeding through her maternal tone. "It is just a ceremony. You already passed your defense last month. We will take you out to dinner next week, I promise." Before I could argue, the phone fumbled, and my father's gruff voice cut through the line. "Charlie, stop bothering your mother. Dean is at a crucial moment right now. These guys are talking about putting serious money into the brand. We do not have time for this guilt trip. We will see you later." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. The dial tone buzzed in my hand like a dying insect. I felt a cold numbness wash over my skin, chilling the sweat on my neck. I opened my social media application, driven by a masochistic urge to see the full picture. The first thing that popped up on my feed was a live video stream from my mother's account. I tapped the screen. There was Dean, holding up a perfectly smoked brisket, the crowd cheering around him. My father was in the background, clapping his hands heavily, a look of absolute, unadulterated pride on his face. The caption beneath the video read, "Tonight is the night for the Mendoza family star." The Mendoza family star. Not the daughter who just spent half a decade uncovering systemic exploitation in public contracts. Not the woman who fought tooth and nail to be the first in the family to earn an advanced degree. The star was the son with the barbecue sauce on his hands. "Move forward, please," a staff member hissed, waving a rolled-up program at me. I shoved my phone back into my pocket and walked blindly forward. The heavy double doors swung open, and the blinding stadium lights hit my face. The sheer volume of the auditorium was staggering. Thousands of people were cheering, blowing air horns, waving massive cardboard cutouts of their children's faces. It was a sea of absolute, unconditional support. I kept my eyes fixed on the left side of the arena. Section 4. Row G. As I marched down the central aisle, the row came into clear view. The girl in front of me had an entire section of relatives wearing matching customized shirts, screaming her name until their voices went hoarse. I looked past them to my reserved spot, 4 folding chairs, completely, utterly empty. They sat there, a gaping hole in the crowded stadium, looking less like missing guests and more like a physical sentence pronounced against my worth. Those empty chairs screamed louder than any cheering family. They told everyone in that room that the woman walking in the black gown had nobody who cared enough to show up. I took my seat. The ceremony dragged on for hours. Speeches about the future, about changing the world, about the unwavering support of the families in the audience. Every word felt like sandpaper against an open wound. When they finally called my name, I stood up. I walked up the wooden steps. The dean handed me the leather-bound diploma cover. He smiled warmly and shook my hand. The photographer flashed a bright light in my eyes. I looked out into the vast, dark auditorium. I did not search for my family this time. I knew there was no one looking back at me. I walked off the stage, holding the empty leather folder that represented my life's work, feeling entirely hollowed out. When the ceremony ended, the floor became a chaotic mess of hugs, tears, and flying bouquets. I navigated through the joyous crowds, a ghost in my own life. I did not stop for pictures by the university fountain. I did not buy a commemorative keychain. I just walked straight to the parking garage, got into my rusted sedan, and drove home to my quiet, cramped apartment. I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing my heavy gown. The apartment was completely silent. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. The notification badge showed 42 unread messages. I scrolled through them. It was a flood of imagery from the Belmere backyard. There was a picture of Dean clinking beer glasses with a man in a sharp suit, a video of my father proudly showing off the custom smoker, a selfie of my mother holding a plate of sliced brisket, her face glowing with happiness. There were comments from aunts, uncles, and cousins praising Dean, calling him a genius, predicting his empire. I scrolled all the way to the bottom. I looked for a single text, just one small message hidden among the barbecue pictures, a simple congratulations, a recognition that I had achieved something monumental today. There was nothing, not half a word about my doctorate. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. The tears did not come. Instead, a deep, heavy clarity settled into my chest, anchoring me to the mattress. For years, I had made excuses for them. I had told myself they were just busy, that they did not understand academic achievements, that they showed love in different, chaotic ways. But looking at the timeline, at the meticulously planned catering event scheduled precisely on the afternoon they knew I would be walking across the stage, the truth was undeniable. The pain that night did not come from the realization that they had missed my graduation. The agonizing, breathless pain came from finally understanding that they did not accidentally forget my moment. They actively, consciously, and deliberately chose someone else, and they did not even care enough to hide it. Growing up in the Mendoza household, the roles were assigned early and written in permanent ink. Dean was the face. He was the golden boy with the effortless charisma, the high school quarterback who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket with a grin. I was the secondary brain, the designated fixer, the silent janitor sweeping up the debris of his charm. If Dean forgot a science project, I was the one up at 2 a.m. gluing cardboard. If Dean overspent his allowance, I was the one calculating how to cover his gas money so our father would not yell. When the family decided to turn my father's weekend backyard hobby into a legitimate business, the dynamic merely scaled up. It started with a flimsy pop-up tent at the county fair and eventually morphed into Ember and Oak Barbecue, a brand that looked incredibly rustic and authentic on social media. My brother stood front and center. He was the rugged, smoke-stained artisan in the leather apron, flipping brisket for the local news cameras and charming food bloggers. He was the soul of the brand. I, on the other hand, was the unpaid infrastructure holding that soul together. While Dean was busy tasting dry rubs and posing for promotional photos, I was drowning in the bureaucratic nightmare of the American food service industry. I handled the health department permits, the fire marshal clearances, the local zoning variances. I filed the quarterly estimated taxes. I drafted the email templates for our meat suppliers, negotiating the price per pound for wholesale pork shoulders because Dean had a habit of agreeing to whatever number the vendor said first. I managed the messy, frustrating payroll schedule for the seasonal workers. I was the invisible engine in the dark, coated in the grease of administrative labor. My academic life, the one thing that was entirely my own, was treated as a mildly amusing hobby by my parents. I remember the afternoon I received the letter stating I had been awarded a highly competitive, full-ride research fellowship for my master's degree. It was worth tens of thousands of dollars. I ran into the kitchen, the thick envelope trembling in my hands. My mother was wiping down the stainless steel prep tables. She glanced at the letter, gave a tight, distracted smile, and said, "That is nice, Charlie. Really good. Hey, since you are here, can you cross-reference the invoices from the beef supplier? Dean thinks they overcharged us by a few $100s on the last delivery, and you are so much better with the numbers than he is." That was the standard response. Every academic milestone, every published paper, every grant I secured was met with a fleeting second of performative praise before being immediately weaponized for the benefit of Ember and Oak. It took me years to understand the true nature of our relationship. For a long time, I thought they simply did not understand my world. I thought they were just blue-collar people intimidated by academia. But sitting in my quiet apartment, running the memories through the cold filter of reality, I saw the truth. They did not just overlook me. They extracted value from me. They mined my intelligence, my organizational skills, and my desperate need for their approval to build the scaffolding for Dean's throne. I was a resource. They never realized how deeply their exploitation fueled my actual work. They thought my doctorate in labor policy and public contracting systems was just theoretical nonsense, a bunch of useless books. They did not know that my dissertation, a sweeping analysis of wage theft, systemic exploitation of undocumented workers in the food service sector, and the manipulation of local government bids, was entirely inspired by them. My research was not born in a sterile university library. It was born in the suffocating heat of the Ember and Oak prep kitchen. I spent years watching exactly how a family business cuts corners. I saw the back of the house staff, mostly young men and immigrants, working 50 or 60-hour weeks. I knew their faces, and I knew exactly how my family paid them. I would frequently corner Dean in the cramped office behind the restaurant, pointing at the messy ledger. "You cannot keep doing this," I told him once, dropping a stack of timesheets onto his desk. "These guys are working 12-hour shifts, and you are capping their recorded hours at 40, so you do not have to pay time and a half. That is illegal." Dean. "It is wage theft." Dean just leaned back in his chair, propped his boots on the desk, and laughed. It was that easy. Dismissive laugh he always used when I was being too serious. "Charlie, relax. This is the restaurant business, not a textbook. We take care of our guys. We give them free meals. We give them cash bonuses under the table when we have a good month. You cannot run a barbecue joint on union rules. It would bankrupt us. The Department of Labor does not care about free ribs," I argued, my voice tight. "If anyone reports this, or if you get audited, they will look at the paper trail. And right now, Your paper trail is a liability. You need to stop fixing the numbers after the fact to make the labor costs look good for the bank. That is why we have you, little sister, he said, winking at me. You fix the papers. You make them look pretty. When I refused to falsify the documents, he would just wait until I went back to campus and have our mother do it. They called it creative accounting. They called it surviving in a tough economy. I called it exploitation. Our arguments always ended the same way. Dean would get defensive, his ego bruised by his younger sister lecturing him on compliance. He would sneer and deliver his favorite, jagged little joke. You know, Charlie, all those fancy degrees of yours are completely useless unless you know how to turn them into revenue. Out here in the real world, nobody cares about your thesis. They care about what sells. He was wrong. Of course, people did care. The university cared. The academic journals cared. But in the universe of the Mendoza family, Dean's word was law, and my words were just background noise. I absorbed those insults for a decade. I swallowed the disrespect because they were my family, and the cultural narrative I grew up with demanded absolute loyalty, no matter the cost to my own sanity. I kept doing their taxes. I kept filing their permits. I kept untangling the legal messes Dean created every time he signed a catering contract he had not bothered to read. I kept hoping that if I just proved my usefulness enough, if I just saved them from disaster one more time, they would look at me with the same unvarnished pride they reserved for him. The empty chairs at my graduation ceremony were not the first time they had hurt me. They were not even the deepest wound. I had endured a lifetime of being pushed to the side, of being told my achievements were secondary to my brother's ambition. But sitting in my dark bedroom that night, staring at the pictures of Dean holding court by his smoker, something fundamental snapped. The graduation absence was not the first wound, but it was the final one. It was the moment the heavy, suffocating blanket of denial was finally lifted off my chest. I realized I could no longer lie to myself. I could no longer pretend that my family was just misguided or overwhelmed. I could no longer hold out hope that one day they would wake up, look at me, and apologize for taking me for granted. They were never going to change. They were never going to see me as anything other than Dean's administrative assistant, a convenient tool to be picked up when needed and discarded when the cameras started rolling. If I stayed, I would spend the rest of my life in the shadows of the Ember and Oak sign, slowly letting them drain every ounce of my potential to fuel a brand that did not even bear my name. I would become complicit in the very labor abuses I had spent years studying and condemning. I closed the photo application on my phone. The blue light faded, leaving the room in complete darkness. I did not feel sad anymore. The grief had burned away, leaving behind something much colder, much harder, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the absolute, unshakable clarity of a woman who has finally decided to cut the anchor. The years of being the dutiful, invisible sister were over. In the past, if I felt wronged, I would have drafted a 5-page letter. I would have poured all my agonizing psychoanalysis into paragraphs of hurt, trying to explain my pain to people who had a vested interest in misunderstanding me. But the morning after I received my empty diploma folder, I woke up with a quiet, hollowed-out clarity. I opened my laptop, typed in the family business email address, and wrote exactly 3 sentences. I informed them I had accepted an out-of-state position. I would not be returning to Belmere to assist with the upcoming regional expansion, and I wished Ember and Oak the best of luck. I did not mention the graduation. I did not demand an apology. I just clicked send. It felt less like a declaration of war and more like pulling a plug from a socket. 2 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into the trunk of my rusted sedan and drove over 800 miles west to Northvale, Colorado. I traded the suffocating humidity and the permanent scent of hickory wood for the sharp, thin air of the mountains. I had accepted an offer at Harbor North Integrity Lab. They were a mid-sized firm specializing in contract risk analysis and corporate fraud detection. When they interviewed me, they did not ask if I could work a cash register or if I minded smelling like roasted pork. They asked me to explain the exact methodologies I used in my dissertation to track cyclical wage suppression in municipal service bids. They offered me a starting salary that was nearly triple what my father had ever made in his best year at the manufacturing plant, long before the barbecue business took off. Walking into the Harbor North offices on my first day felt like stepping onto a different planet. There were no grease-stained floors, no shouting matches over missing inventory, no chaotic emergencies masquerading as passion. It was a hushed, brightly lit sanctuary of data. My new colleagues were forensic accountants, former federal auditors, and data scientists. They spoke in the precise, unsentimental language of compliance and liability. My job was to sit in a quiet office with a double monitor setup and do exactly what I had trained for years to do. I hunted for ghosts in the machine. I reviewed massive portfolios of public contracts, cross-referencing them with labor filings to spot anomalous patterns. If a contractor claimed they were paying 50 union workers a prevailing wage, but their payroll tax deductions only reflected 20 people working part-time hours, my algorithms would catch the discrepancy. For the first time in my 29 years of life, my brain was not treated as a convenient accessory. I was not the girl called into the back room just to fix a few numbers to make them look nice for the bank. When I spoke in strategy meetings, senior partners stopped talking and took notes. When I pointed out a red flag in a multi-million-dollar municipal catering bid, my supervisor did not laugh at me or call me naive. He thanked me, flagged the account, and halted the approval process. I was addressed as Dr. Mendoza. The title did not feel like a heavy, useless velvet hood anymore. It felt like a shield. With the physical distance established, I needed to solidify the digital boundaries. On my third Friday in Colorado, I sat at my sleek new kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and began the tedious process of cutting the digital umbilical cord. Over the years, because I was the only one in the family who understood basic cybersecurity or cloud storage, my personal email and phone number were tethered to dozens of Ember and Oak administrative accounts. I systematically went through every single one. I logged into the vendor portals, the local tax registry, the social media management tools, and the shared cloud drives. I revoked my own administrative access. I changed passwords on accounts I was handing back to them, emailing the new login credentials to my mother with zero additional commentary. I unlinked my recovery phone numbers. I watched the little notification icons disappear from my dashboard one by one. It was during this digital house cleaning that I stumbled across the first anomaly. I was checking a legacy cloud storage account, a basic tier drive I had set up 5 years ago when the restaurant first needed a place to store high-resolution logo files. I wanted to make sure none of my personal tax returns were still lingering in the folders before I transferred the ownership completely to Dean. I clicked through the archived folders, bypassing the old menus and the health inspector checklists. Hidden inside a subfolder labeled Miscellaneous Administration, I found an automated backup directory. I opened it. Staring back at me from the bright white screen were 4 high-resolution image files. I clicked on the first one. It was a perfectly cropped, transparent background graphic of my own signature. I opened the next 3. They were variations, my full name, my initials, and a formal version with my middle initial included. They were digital stamps I had created years ago when I was desperately trying to streamline the permitting process for my brother. I used to slap them onto mundane vendor agreements so I would not have to drive 40 minutes across town just to sign a delivery receipt for paper napkins. I sat perfectly still. The coffee in my mug stopped steaming. The old Charlie, the daughter who desperately wanted to believe in the fundamental goodness of her family, would have picked up the phone immediately. She would have called her mother, panicked and hurt, and demanded to know why they were hoarding digital copies of her legal signature. She would have threatened to call the police, creating a dramatic, messy confrontation that Dean would inevitably twist into me being hysterical. But the woman sitting in that Colorado apartment was an analyst at an integrity lab. I spent 40 hours a week studying how desperate people cut corners and commit fraud. I knew exactly what a digital signature file looked like when it was left lying around in an unsecured, shared folder belonging to a rapidly expanding business that had a chronic aversion to regulatory compliance. I did not call the police. I did not call my family. Instead, I opened a secure, encrypted drive on my personal computer. I took meticulous, time-stamped screenshots of the directory, the file properties, and the automated backup logs showing that the folder was still actively syncing with the primary Ember and Oak administrative account. I downloaded the raw files. Then, I quietly backed out of the system, leaving the original files exactly where they were, untouched and undisturbed. I did not delete them. It was a chilling, quiet moment of transformation. I was acting like a person who had finally learned the most vital lesson of survival. I was no longer keeping hope that they would suddenly develop a moral compass. I was keeping evidence for the day they inevitably proved they lacked one. Walking to work the next morning, the crisp Colorado wind hitting my face, I felt a strange, solid weight settle in my chest. For months, a tiny, indoctrinated voice in the back of my head had whispered that leaving my family was an act of profound betrayal. Blood is thicker than water, the old saying went. But as I swiped my security badge to enter the glass doors of Harbor North, greeted by professionals who valued my mind instead of exploiting it, that voice finally went silent. I realized that walking away from the smoke and the grease and the endless, demanding shadows of my family was not a betrayal at all. Choosing myself, protecting my name, and refusing to be the secondary character in my brother's manufactured success story was the very first act of true self-respect I had ever committed. 8 months into my tenure at Harbor North Integrity Lab, the rhythm of my new life had settled into a sharp, satisfying groove. I had traded emotional chaos for empirical certainty. My early performance metrics were flawless, prompting the senior partners to hand me the keys to a newly developed algorithmic risk detection model. This proprietary system was designed specifically for mid-tier service contractors, aggressively hunting for multi-city municipal bids. These were the companies trying to leap from local, handshake deals to massive, taxpayer-funded contracts. The software was hungry for anomalies. It scanned tax filings, employee headcount ratios, equipment leases, and historical revenue streams to flag entities that were growing too fast, claiming too much, or hiding irregular overhead costs. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon at exactly 3:45 when the dashboard on my left monitor lit up with a high-severity alert. The algorithm had caught a massive spike. A regional food service provider had tripped 7 out of 12 risk indicators in a single quarter. The flagged entity showed a staggering 400% revenue projection increase over a 12-month period. This was a statistical impossibility for a standard catering group without a massive influx of venture capital or a sudden, suspicious merger. I leaned forward, my fingers flying across the keyboard to pull up the raw filing data. I clicked open the master dossier. The legal entity name flashed in bold black letters across my screen. Ember and Oak Regional Catering. The breath left my lungs in a violent rush. My vision blurred around the edges of the monitor. It was my family. But it was not the small, chaotic backyard operation I had left behind in Belmere. Dean had mutated the brand into a corporate leviathan. According to the bid submissions pulled by the system, Ember and Oak was no longer just pitching to local businessmen for weekend retreats. They were actively submitting aggressive bids for major municipal contracts. They were going after the exclusive food service rights for the newly constructed Tri-County Stadium, the primary vendor slot for the statewide Summer Music Festival, and a massive multi-year contract to run the public event kitchens for the Metropolitan Convention Center. These were contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. A cold, prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. Dean could barely manage the payroll for 15 seasonal workers without my mother fixing the ledger. There was absolutely no way he had the logistical infrastructure, the capital, or the compliance record to secure state-level public contracts. I bypassed the financial summaries and dug directly into the supplementary documentation. I opened a 120-page digital document labeled as the Corporate Responsibility and Operational Compliance Brochure. On page 14, under a section titled Executive Leadership and Ethical Standards, the scrolling suddenly stopped. I froze, my hand cramping around the computer mouse. Staring back at me was my own name, Dr. Charlie Mendoza. But it was not just my name. Beneath it, in crisp, professional typography, was a title I had never held, never agreed to, and never even heard of: Director of Ethical Labor Research. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I read the paragraph next to my fabricated title. It was a dense, academic block of text detailing the company's unwavering commitment to fair wages, equitable scheduling, and the systemic eradication of exploitation in the food service sector. The words felt sickeningly familiar. I grabbed my personal laptop from my bag, opened my dissertation file, and ran a side-by-side comparison. It was a direct, word-for-word copy. Dean and my parents had taken the core abstract of my doctoral thesis, the exact research they had continuously mocked as useless university nonsense, and pasted it into their corporate prospectus. They were using my academic credentials to paint a facade of progressive, worker-first ethics over an operation built on under-the-table cash and stolen overtime. The violation was profound, but the true horror was waiting on page 47. I scrolled down to the mandatory state compliance certifications. These were the legally binding documents where a bidding contractor swears under penalty of perjury that their labor practices meet municipal codes, that their safety training is up to date, and that their employee compensation structure is fully transparent. At the bottom of the wage compliance guarantee, right next to the date, was a digital signature. It was the exact same high-resolution image file I had discovered in the abandoned cloud backup folder months ago. My signature. Applied to a legally binding state document, guaranteeing the ethical treatment of hundreds of hypothetical workers, for a company I had explicitly cut ties with. They had not just stolen my academic identity for marketing purposes, they were actively committing felony fraud in my name. The ambient noise of the Colorado office felt deafening. The old instinct to panic, to call home and scream into the receiver, flared up for a microsecond before my professional training brutally suppressed it. I was a risk analyst. I knew exactly what happens when an employee discovers a personal connection to a flagged target. If I touched the file any further, if I tried to investigate this quietly, any defense attorney would easily dismiss the findings as a personal vendetta from an estranged family member. The evidence would be permanently tainted by a massive conflict of interest. I stood up. My legs felt like lead, but my mind was operating with terrifying, crystalline precision. I locked my computer screen, picked up my notepad, and walked straight down the glass-walled corridor to the corner office of my department director. I knocked twice and stepped inside. "We have a critical situation on the new algorithmic sweep," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The system flagged a high-risk contractor bidding on the stadium and convention center projects. The entity is Ember and Oak Regional Catering. My director looked up from his dual monitors, noting the rigidity in my posture. "Okay. What is the anomaly?" "The anomaly is that I am listed as their Director of Ethical Labor Research," I replied evenly, looking him dead in the eye. "And my digital signature has been forged on their state labor compliance guarantees. The primary owners of this company are my immediate family members. I severed all professional and personal ties with them 8 months ago." The director's pen stopped moving. The casual office atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced by the heavy, serious air of impending legal warfare. He did not ask me if I was sure. He did not ask about my family drama. He simply nodded, his face turning grim. "You are immediately recused from the final recommendation and reporting phase for this target," he stated, his tone shifting into strict protocol mode. "You are not to draft the executive summary or communicate with the municipal bid boards regarding this entity." I nodded, accepting the necessary professional boundary. "Understood. However," he continued, leaning forward and lowering his voice, "this is no longer just a flagged discrepancy for an overgrown catering company. Falsifying compliance documents on municipal bids of this magnitude using a stolen identity crosses into organized, state-level fraud. Do not delete a single thing. I want you to meticulously secure every piece of raw data the system pulled, export the entire dossier, timestamp it, and transfer it to the isolated legal drive. They have crossed a massive line. Dr. Mendoza. And we are going to make sure the paper trail is absolutely bulletproof." I walked back to my desk. The glowing screen was waiting for me, displaying the fake corporate brochure with my stolen words. The chill that had started at the back of my neck settled deep into my bones. My family had built a trap out of my own achievements, hoping I would be too far away, or too intimidated, to notice. They thought they could use my name as a shield to secure millions of dollars. They were about to learn that the daughter they treated as a convenient accessory was actually the architect of their downfall. I hired a private attorney named Marcus. I knew I could not rely solely on the internal corporate firewall of my new employer to handle the deeply personal nature of this fraud. I needed a legal advocate who worked exclusively for me. someone who could strip away the emotional wreckage and focus purely on the liability. Together, Marcus and I spent 3 intense weeks filing aggressive public record requests across multiple county and state jurisdictions. We bypassed the polished marketing materials and dug straight into the raw, unredacted operational history of the Mendoza family expansion. The rustic, folksy veneer of family, tradition, and local American identity that my brother projected on television began to peel away in jagged strips. What lay beneath the wholesome, smoke-scented public relations campaign was a calculated, predatory machine. Marcus managed to secure a copy of the winning proposal Dean had submitted for a massive municipal grant, a contract valued at over $2 million. Dean had not won this highly competitive bid because his culinary skills were superior or because his operational logistics were flawless. He won it because he had applied under a specialized municipal tier designated strictly for progressive, worker-friendly enterprises. The application leaned heavily on a fabricated internal corporate structure that my mother had personally designed. She called it the Alma Mendoza Workforce Initiative, naming it after my late grandmother. Reading the brochure for this fake initiative made my stomach turn. The glossy pages claimed that Ember and Oak operated a comprehensive employee training and upward mobility fund, a program supposedly structured entirely around the ethical labor frameworks and academic research developed by Dr. Charlie Mendoza. They wrote that a percentage of all corporate profits went directly into upskilling our back-of-house staff. It was a complete, grotesque fabrication. My grandmother had worked herself into an early grave in a non-unionized textile mill, barely speaking enough English to defend herself against abusive foremen. Now, her memory, coupled with my stolen academic credentials, was being weaponized by her own daughter and grandson to secure lucrative government subsidies. The paper trail of forged signatures and fake initiatives was damning, but the human cost hiding behind those documents was infinitely worse. A few days into my private investigation, I received a secure, anonymous message on a professional networking platform. It was from a former operations manager who had abruptly quit my brother's company 2 months prior. We arranged a call on a secure line late one evening. His voice shook with a potent mixture of residual fear and profound exhaustion, painting a bleak picture of the daily reality inside the new restaurant branches. He told me Dean had implemented a strict, unspoken policy for all shift supervisors. Every manager was instructed to manually shave 20 to 30 minutes off the end of every closing shift on the digital timesheets. Dean justified this behind closed doors by claiming it accounted for unauthorized smoke breaks or slow cleanup times, but in reality, it was systemic, calculated time shaving. Across a workforce of over 70 employees working 6 days a week, those stolen minutes equated to tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid wages every single quarter. Shortly after that harrowing phone call, a thick, unmarked manila envelope arrived at Marcus's office. It was sent by a former bookkeeper who had been pushed out when she started asking too many questions. The envelope contained photocopies of dual ledger entries, the official books, the ones prepared for the tax authorities and municipal auditors, showed strict compliance with minimum wage laws and overtime regulations. But the shadow ledger, written in my mother's unmistakable, looping cursive handwriting, detailed a massive system of off-the-books cash payments explicitly designed to avoid paying overtime premiums. The envelope also included a heartbreaking list of illegal payroll deductions. Dean was systematically charging the prep cooks, dishwashers, and line servers mandatory fees for basic operational costs. He deducted money from their weekly checks for uniform laundering, broken spatulas, shattered plates, and even a flat percentage of the credit card processing fees the restaurant incurred from customers. He was shifting his own corporate overhead directly onto the shoulders of vulnerable people who were barely making $14 an hour. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me staring blindly at the legal documents spread across the conference table. For my entire adult life, my family had treated my academic career as a punchline. They rolled their eyes at family dinners when I tried to discuss systemic labor abuse. They called my research useless college nonsense that had absolutely no bearing on the tough realities of the American free market. Dean used to laugh in my face and tell me that theoretical ethics did not keep the lights on or pay the commercial rent. Yet, the absolute second my theories became a lucrative marketing tool, They did not hesitate to steal my intellectual property and parade it around municipal boardrooms. They took the very concepts they had mocked and commodified them to win the favor of local politicians. The ultimate sickening realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My family did not just steal my name and my doctoral title to make their corporate prospectus look sophisticated. They actively used my identity, my pristine academic reputation, and my life's work as a psychological smokescreen to conceal the exact type of predatory exploitation my dissertation was written to expose. They draped themselves in my credibility to systematically bleed their workforce dry, knowing that no city inspector would look too closely at a company boasting an in-house ethical labor director with a doctorate. They had turned me into the patron saint of their sweatshop, sitting in that quiet, sterile law office, surrounded by irrefutable proof of wage theft and corporate fraud. The final, lingering traces of daughterly guilt evaporated from my conscience. The cultural conditioning that demanded I protect my family at all costs finally shattered. If I walked away now, if I simply instructed Marcus to send a quiet cease and desist letter and let them discreetly remove my name from their websites to avoid a public scandal, I would be saving myself. But I would be abandoning everyone else. I would become silently complicit in the theft of those workers' wages. I would be abandoning the exhausted dishwashers paying for Dean's broken plates, and the line cooks having half an hour of their lives stolen from them every single night. My silence would be a fundamental betrayal of every single principle I had spent nearly a decade studying and defending. The Mendoza family had built a glittering, multi-million-dollar house of cards on the broken backs of desperate, vulnerable people, and they had arrogantly used my face as the reinforced steel door to keep the authorities out. It was no longer just about the empty chairs at my graduation ceremony or the years of emotional neglect. It was about justice. It was time to lock the doors and strike the match. I sat at my kitchen table, the glowing screen of my laptop closed, the thick legal dossiers neatly stacked next to a cold cup of coffee. Outside my window, the Colorado night was pitch black and silent. Inside my chest, a different kind of silence had taken root. It was the absolute stillness that follows the death of a lifelong illusion. I picked up my phone and dialed the landline of the house in Belmere. It rang 3 times before my mother picked up. The background noise was a chaotic symphony of clanking pots, loud laughter, and the faint, thumping bass of country music. It was a standard Thursday night at the Mendoza household. "Hello," she answered, her tone buoyant and distracted. "Charlie, is that you, sweetheart? We are right in the middle of prepping the briskets for the weekend rush. What a pleasant surprise." I did not exchange pleasantries. I did not ask about her day. I bypassed the years of accumulated grievances, the ignored graduation, the dismissive remarks, and drove the blade straight into the center of the issue. "Mom," I said, my voice dangerously level, "I need you to explain to me, right now, exactly why my full legal name, my doctoral title, and my forged digital signature are sitting in a municipal bid file for the city stadium contract." The line went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. The clinking of pots stopped, but when she spoke again, there was absolutely no panic in her voice. There was no guilt, no stammering apology for being caught in a massive lie. Instead, she sounded mildly annoyed, like I had called to complain about a borrowed sweater. "Oh, Charlie, you saw that online. We were going to tell you," she sighed, exasperated. "You are being so dramatic. It is just family using family resources. What is the big deal? We needed someone with a fancy title to make the city council happy, and you have that piece of paper. It is not like you were using it for anything that actually makes money. We are a family business. What belongs to one of us belongs to all of us." She spoke of my doctorate, the culmination of thousands of hours of grueling research and relentless academic discipline, as if it were a communal lawnmower left in the shared garage. Before I could respond to the sheer audacity of her logic, the sound of the receiver fumbling echoed in my ear. My father had grabbed the phone. "Do not talk to your mother with that interrogator tone," my father barked, his voice rough and uncompromising. "You think you are so superior sitting out there in the mountains. Let me remind you of a few cold, hard facts. The sweat from this barbecue pit kept a roof over your head for 18 years. The money we made standing over hot coals paid for your clothes, your food, and the gas in the car that drove you to your fancy university. We fed you. We educated you. You owe this family some return on investment. You have a moral obligation to return value to the house that built you. We put your name on a piece of paper. You should be honored we found a use for it." He delivered his verdict with the absolute certainty of a man who equated basic parental provision with a lifelong, unconditional ownership of his child's intellectual property. "You did not just put my name on a piece of paper," I replied, keeping my breathing slow and measured. "You committed identity theft. You forged my signature on legally binding state compliance documents to cover up the fact that you are stealing wages from your own workers." "All right, that is enough." Dean's voice suddenly cut through the speaker. He must have put the phone on speaker mode. He sounded exactly like he did when he was negotiating with a reluctant meat supplier. Smooth, patronizing, and utterly transactional. "Let us all take a breath and be adults about this. Charlie, listen to me. I admit, we borrowed your credentials to smooth over the application process. The city boards love that ethical labor nonsense, but this is a win for everyone. We are looking at contracts worth tens of millions of dollars." He paused, letting the magnitude of the imaginary money hang in the air, waiting for me to be impressed. "Here is what we are going to do," Dean continued, pivoting seamlessly into a bribe. "I am prepared to offer you a 2% equity stake in the regional holding company, non-voting shares, obviously, but still a solid payout. All you have to do is sign a single, backdated retroactive consulting agreement. It makes everything perfectly legal on paper. You get a piece of the pie, we get the stadium contract, and everyone goes home rich. It is a win." I closed my eyes. He genuinely believed that my integrity had a price tag, and that he could purchase my complicity with a symbolic fraction of a company built on exploitation. He expected me to legitimize my own kidnapping. "You are offering me a microscopic percentage of a fraudulent enterprise in exchange for my participation in a federal crime," I stated, stripping away his corporate jargon. "The answer is absolutely not." The smooth negotiator vanished instantly. Dean's ego, fragile and heavily guarded, shattered the moment he was denied. "You are so bitter," he spat, his voice turning vicious and ugly. "This is not about the business. This is not about the workers. This is about your stupid graduation, isn't it? You are still crying because Mom and Dad missed watching you walk across a stage to get a useless certificate. So now you want to throw a tantrum and tear down my empire. You are just a jealous little girl trying to get intellectual revenge because nobody cares about your books." I did not interrupt him. I let him rage, letting the venom spill out of him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I was not the little sister cowering in the kitchen anymore. When Dean finally ran out of breath, my mother took the phone off speaker. Her voice dropped into an urgent, conspiratorial whisper, attempting one final, desperate manipulation. "Charlie, sweetheart, you have to stop this nonsense and play along right now," she pleaded, using the tone she reserved for managing social crises. "I already spoke to the features editor at the Belmere Chronicle. I promised them an exclusive sit-down interview with you next Wednesday. I told the whole town you were coming home to be our official academic face. If you back out now, you will humiliate this family in front of the entire county. You will make me look like a liar." That was the final twist of the knife. It was not enough that they stole my work. My mother had actively trapped me in a public relations cage, assuming that my fear of causing a public scene, my ingrained habit of keeping the family peace, would force me to smile for the cameras and swallow the lie. They relied on my silence as their ultimate safety net. I took a deep breath. The air in my lungs felt entirely different. It was clean. "I am not going to argue with you anymore," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I am not looking for an apology, and I am not asking for an explanation. But I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. You will not get a retroactive contract. You will not get a press interview. From this exact second forward, any piece of paper, any digital file, and any public statement that contains my name or my signature is no longer a family favor." I paused, making sure the silence on their end was absolute. "It is legal evidence." I pressed the red button on my screen and ended the call. I did not block their numbers. I simply set my phone face down on the table. My hands were not shaking. I did not shed a single tear. The heavy, suffocating hope that they would eventually love me for who I was had finally died, and in its place, a brilliant, tactical focus had emerged. They thought they could bully me into submission. They thought my refusal to scream and shout meant I was weak. They had no idea that by refusing to apologize, they had just handed me the final permission I needed. I pulled the legal dossiers toward me and uncapped my pen. I was officially preparing for a paper war, armed with the exact weapon my family consistently despised and fundamentally underestimated. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in forensic deconstruction. I transformed my living room into a war room. Marcus flew in from Denver, bringing along a retired municipal bidding specialist named Sarah, a woman who possessed a terrifyingly precise knowledge of local government loopholes. We were joined via secure video link by the two former Ember and Oak employees who had reached out to me earlier. One was the operations manager, and the other was a junior payroll clerk Dean had fired just before the winter holidays. We did not waste time discussing my family dynamics. We treated Dean and my parents as hostile corporate entities. We took the chaotic puzzle pieces of their expanding empire and slammed them into a coherent, undeniable timeline of systemic fraud. Sarah took the lead on tracing the municipal grant money. She cross-referenced the public disbursement records with the vendor lists Dean submitted in his quarterly operational reports. That was when we found the shell company. Dean claimed he was paying top dollar for event staging and logistical support, using grant money specifically earmarked for local business development. He was funneling thousands of dollars every month to a vendor called Apex Event Solutions. A quick search of the state business registry revealed that Apex Event Solutions was a limited liability company registered to a residential address. The sole proprietor was a woman named Chelsea, my brother's on-again, off-again girlfriend who worked part-time as a spin class instructor. There was no staging equipment. There was no logistical support. It was a phantom vendor designed entirely to wash public funds back into Dean's own pockets. While Sarah dismantled the grant fraud, the former payroll clerk provided the killing blow for the labor abuse allegations. She mailed Marcus a small, encrypted USB drive. It contained the raw, unedited master spreadsheets from the scheduling software Dean used before my mother cooked the final books. The data was breathtaking in its cruelty. The spreadsheets showed exactly how overtime was handled internally. If a line cook worked 55 hours in a single week, the official payroll system only registered 40. The remaining 15 hours of time and a half pay were completely erased from the digital ledger. Instead, Dean would hand the worker a thin cash envelope at the end of the shift, paying them a flat, straight time rate that fell well below the legal minimum wage. But the most sickening revelation was what Dean did with the stolen difference. The clerk had matched the dates of the erased overtime hours with sudden massive spikes in the company marketing budget. Dean was literally stealing the premium wages of his exhausted prep cooks to buy targeted social media advertisements and glossy billboards promoting his image as a community leader. As I dug through the final stack of physical proposals Dean had submitted directly to the City Council of Belmere, my blood turned to ice. I found the master pitch deck for the Belmere Summer Heritage Festival. This was not just a catering gig. This was the crown jewel of local public contracts. If Dean secured the exclusive food and beverage rights for the 6-week event series, it would cement his status as the undisputed regional barbecue king. It would guarantee him millions of dollars in guaranteed revenue and give him the leverage to franchise across the state. I turned to page 12 of the proposal. There, under the heading of Executive Leadership and Community Values, was a full-page photograph of me. It was not a professional headshot. It was a grainy, slightly blurred image of me wearing my black doctoral gown and velvet hood. I recognized the angle instantly. It had been screen-grabbed directly from the university livestream on the day of my graduation. The very event they had abandoned me to attend a backyard tasting session was now the visual centerpiece of their most lucrative business proposal. Beneath the stolen photo was a caption boasting that Dr. Charlie Mendoza was actively overseeing the ethical integration of the company workforce. They had not just skipped my ceremony, they had monetized my absence. Marcus sat across the table, watching my face carefully as I stared at the photograph. He steepled his fingers, his expression deadly serious. "Charlie," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "I need you to understand the gravity of what we are looking at. When you first called me, we were dealing with family favoritism and some aggressive, shady business practices. But this right here is a completely different animal. This is academic identity theft deployed to secure millions of dollars in municipal funds. This is wire fraud. This is systematic wage theft. This is perjury. We have a rock-solid case, but you need to be absolutely certain you want to pull this trigger." He leaned forward, tapping the stack of documents. "Once we hand this dossier over to the Belmere Contract Integrity Unit and the State Labor Board, the chain reaction is permanent. The city will immediately freeze all pending bids. They will open a full-scale audit. Your brother could face federal charges. Your parents could lose the house if it is tied to the corporate collateral. There is no quiet settlement here. There is no walking this back. If we submit this, you are effectively dropping a bomb on your own family tree. Are you prepared for that?" I looked at the forged signature. I looked at the phantom invoices from Dean's girlfriend. I looked at the spreadsheet detailing the stolen wages of men who worked in suffocating heat just to send a few dollars back to their families. And finally, I looked at the stolen picture of myself, smiling in a gown on a day I had never felt more alone. "There is no family tree left to burn, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and completely void of hesitation. "They chopped it down a long time ago to build a smoker. Send the files." Marcus nodded once, a gesture of profound professional respect. He began organizing the documents into formal evidentiary binders. We drafted the whistleblower cover letter, detailing exactly how Ember and Oak Regional Catering had manipulated public systems and exploited vulnerable labor. We addressed the package directly to the chief investigator of the Belmere Integrity Commission, but as Marcus reached for the master flash drive to seal the envelope, I put my hand over his. A new, sharper strategy was forming in my mind. "We are going to submit everything to the authorities," I told him, looking at the calendar pinned to my wall. "But we are going to time the delivery. Submitting this file to a quiet municipal office where it will sit on a bureaucrat's desk for 3 weeks is not enough." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, looking up from her laptop. "My family does not fear the law," I explained, the pieces clicking into place. "They think they can charm their way out of any audit, just like Dean charms his way out of parking tickets. They think they are invincible as long as they control the narrative. If this happens behind closed doors, Dean will spin it. He will tell the community it is just a misunderstanding, a paperwork error caused by a disgruntled ex-employee. He will play the victim." I picked up the master pitch deck for the Belmere Summer Heritage Festival. "If we want to stop them permanently, we cannot just destroy them in a sealed file. We have to let them destroy themselves," I said, my pulse finally beginning to race with a cold, calculated anticipation. "They built this entire empire on a stage of lies, using my name as the spotlight. I want them to stand under that spotlight when the floor collapses. I want the investors, the city council, and the entire town to see exactly who they are." Marcus raised an eyebrow, a slow, predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. "You have a stage in mind." "Yes," I said, "and I think it is time I finally accepted their invitation to come home." The day after Marcus' hand delivered the sealed whistleblower dossiers to the Municipal Contract Integrity Unit, a new message popped into my personal email inbox. The sender name was my mother. The subject line was remarkably brief, reading only as a call for a family reunion. I opened the message, expecting a tirade of guilt trips or a final, aggressive demand to sign the backdated legal waivers Dean had tried to force on me over the phone. Instead, the tone of the email was jarringly sweet. It was crafted with the polished, saccharine precision of a corporate public relations release masquerading as maternal affection. My mother was officially inviting me to attend the Homegrown Smoke Summit, the largest regional hospitality and food service exposition in our state, held right in the center of Belmere. She wrote that Dean had been selected as the keynote speaker for the closing ceremony. During his speech, he was scheduled to publicly announce his successful bid for the city stadium and summer festival contracts, effectively crowning himself the undisputed king of the local event industry. Her words flowed with a toxic, artificial warmth. She wrote that the family needed to heal, that they missed me, and that it was time to put our silly misunderstandings behind us. But the true motive of the invitation was buried in the third paragraph, carefully disguised as an afterthought. "We really want you there in the VIP section, sweetheart," she wrote. "The press will be taking family photos. Having you stand next to your brother on stage will just make the investors and the city council members feel so much more secure about our new corporate direction." The word secure jumped off the screen. It was a thinly veiled synonym for compliant. They did not want their daughter back. They wanted their stolen asset physically present to legitimize the lies they had fed to the government. My initial instinct was to delete the email, block the address, and let the authorities handle the raid on their own schedule. I had spent 29 years suffocating in their shadow, and stepping back into the Belmere city limits felt like walking willingly back into a cage. But as I sat in my quiet Colorado apartment, reading the email a second time, a colder, sharper realization washed over me. If the municipal investigators simply served a quiet subpoena to their corporate office on a random Tuesday, Dean would immediately spin the narrative. He would hire a crisis management firm. He would tell the local papers that a disgruntled former employee had caused a minor paperwork error. He would play the victim of bureaucratic overreach, and his loyal customers would believe him. The family would survive the scandal behind closed doors. But if the authorities moved while the entire family was standing on the largest stage they had ever built, broadcasting their fraudulent integrity to every local investor and politician in the county, there would be no room for spin. The collapse would be public, undeniable, and permanent. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. I forwarded him the email. Within an hour, he was on a conference call with the lead investigator from the Belmere Integrity Unit. We quietly coordinated the schedule. Marcus also reached out to a trusted investigative journalist at the regional newspaper, a woman who had been digging into municipal bid rigging for months. We gave her enough verified background information to ensure she would secure front-row press credentials for the summit. I replied to my mother's email with a single, polite sentence. I told her I would be there. 2 days later, I drove my rented sedan into the sprawling parking lot of the Belmere Convention Center. The sheer scale of the event was nauseating. There were hundreds of vendor tents, massive outdoor smokers, and thousands of attendees wearing lanyard badges. As I walked toward the main glass entrance of the central exhibition hall, I froze. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Hanging directly above the main doors, suspended by heavy steel cables, was a massive vinyl banner. It had to be at least 30 feet tall and 20 feet wide. It was the stolen photograph of me in my black doctoral gown. The image they had ripped from the university graduation livestream. My face was gazing out over the crowd of thousands. Printed beneath my image, in massive, rustic white lettering, was a slogan that made my blood run entirely cold. The doctor behind our people first promise. I stood on the concrete walkway, people brushing past my shoulders, staring up at the grotesque monument to my family's sociopathy. They had literally turned my stolen identity into a towering billboard. The sheer audacity of it was paralyzing. They were not just bending the rules, they were actively taunting the concept of truth. I forced my legs to move, navigating through the crowded lobby until I found the designated VIP staging area located behind the main auditorium. A security guard checked my name against a clipboard and opened the heavy black curtains. The room was buzzing with frantic energy. Caterers were arranging platters of food. Makeup artists were touching up Dean's forehead. And my father was loudly shaking hands with a group of local bank managers. My mother spotted me first. She dropped a clipboard onto a table and rushed across the room, her arms open wide, her face stretched into a brilliant, camera-ready smile. She was wearing an expensive tailored suit, a sharp departure from the flour-dusted aprons she used to wear. She pulled me into a tight embrace, smelling strongly of premium hairspray and artificial hickory smoke. "Oh, look who it is," she announced. Her voice pitched perfectly to ensure the local reporters loitering near the beverage station could hear her. "Our brilliant girl is home." She pulled back, gripping my shoulders firmly, her manicured nails digging slightly into my jacket. Her eyes were hard and calculating, completely devoid of maternal warmth. "I am so glad you decided to be smart about this," she whispered, her voice dropping so only I could hear. "The features editor from the Belmere Chronicle is out there. I already gave them the angle." You realized that the corporate world was too cold, and you decided to bring your academic brilliance back to your roots to help elevate the family legacy. It is a beautiful story of reunion. All you have to do is nod, smile, and stand next to Dean when the flashbulbs go off. I looked past her shoulder. Dean was watching us from across the room. He gave me a smug, victorious little salute with his coffee cup. He truly believed he had won. He believed that my presence in this room meant I had surrendered to the gravity of the family name, that I was finally willing to be the obedient, silent fixer they had trained me to be. In that brief, suffocating moment, the entire depth of their strategy became crystal clear. This summit was not just a celebration, it was a preemptive defense mechanism. My mother knew the city council was notoriously risk-averse. If there were any murmurs or anonymous tips about labor violations floating around the municipal offices, bringing me out on stage as their official ethical director was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. They were using my physical presence to lock the jaws of public opinion. They were betting that no government auditor would dare disrupt a heartwarming, highly publicized family reunion of a beloved local business. They wanted to use my flesh and blood to force the authorities to hesitate. I looked back at my mother. I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I felt the absolute, icy calm of a woman who was holding the detonator. "Of course, Mom," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly pleasant. I let a gentle, practiced smile touch my lips. "I am exactly where I need to be. I would not miss Dean's big moment for anything in the world." Her shoulders relaxed. She patted my cheek, thoroughly convinced of her own triumph, and turned around to wave at a photographer. I walked over to a quiet corner of the room, picked up a glass of ice water, and waited. If they wanted to treat me like a prop to hold up their empire of lies, I would gladly play the part. I would be the quiet, smiling accessory they always demanded. I would stand exactly where they placed me, because I knew something they did not. I knew that the most dangerous thing you can do is place a prop filled with explosives directly at the structural center of your stage. The asphalt of the Belmere Convention Center parking lot radiated a suffocating afternoon heat, but the temperature was nothing compared to the overwhelming crush of the crowd. The sprawling lot was packed shoulder to shoulder with thousands of eager locals, corporate sponsors, and regional media vans with their satellite dishes raised toward the sky. Dean had managed to transform a simple municipal contract announcement into a full-blown, televised coronation. Everywhere I looked, people were wearing Ember and Oak promotional merchandise. The attendees treated my brother not like a mid-tier regional caterer, but like a local TV celebrity. As I navigated the edges of the main staging area, Dean suddenly appeared from behind a stack of audio equipment and grabbed my wrist. His grip was incredibly tight, possessing a proprietary, uncompromising firmness. He dragged me up the temporary metal stairs and straight onto the massive main stage. The blinding rigged lights immediately hit my eyes, washing out the faces in the front rows. Dean tapped the microphone twice. The heavy thumping sound echoed across the cavernous exhibition hall, instantly commanding the attention of the murmuring crowd. He threw his arm heavily around my shoulder, pulling me tightly against his side, and leaned into the microphone with his $1,000,000, camera-ready smile. "Testing, testing. Hey everyone, listen up," Dean projected, his voice smooth and dripping with artificial humility. "I want you all to look right here. This is my brilliant sister. This is the doctor of the family, the actual brain standing right behind our entire corporate compliance system. Give it up for her." The sycophantic applause and laughter from his wealthy investors in the front row made my stomach turn, but I did not look at the investors. I looked past the VIP section, directing my gaze toward the back of the hall, near the heavy loading doors. That was where the real backbone of the empire stood. I saw the faces of the prep cooks, the dishwashers, and the shift supervisors who had been bussed in to handle the massive catering order for the summit. They looked physically hollowed out. Their uniforms were stained with grease, and their postures sagged under the crushing weight of 80-hour work weeks. A few of them immediately dropped their gaze when I looked their way, their expressions a mix of shame and ingrained fear. But a few others, the older workers who recognized me from the days when I used to argue with Dean in the back office, held my eyes. One older line cook gave a slow, barely perceptible nod. It was a heavy, devastating look. They were placing their final, exhausted hope in the woman standing on the stage next to the man who was stealing their livelihoods. As Dean released his grip and I descended the metal stairs to escape the blinding lights, a woman with a press badge intercepted me in the shadows. She kept her voice extremely low, her eyes darting toward my mother, who was busy schmoozing a city councilman 10 yards away. "Dr. Mendoza," the reporter whispered, her pen hovering over a small spiral notepad. "I am with the Belmere Chronicle. Are the rumors actually true? Are you officially returning to the company board to oversee the ethics of these new expansion contracts?" I did not break my stride, nor did I look at her notepad. I offered her a polite, entirely hollow smile. "Everything will be perfectly clear very soon," I replied softly, leaving her standing in the shadow of the scaffolding. Exactly 20 minutes before the official program was scheduled to begin, the atmosphere in the VIP area suddenly shifted. The frantic pre-show energy evaporated, replaced by a calculated, sudden isolation. My mother appeared at my side, her manicured fingers clamping down hard on my elbow. "Come with me, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with a terrifying, artificial sweetness. "Your father and your brother need a quick family huddle before we go live on stage." She steered me away from the crowded lounge, pushing me out the back exit and into a sleek, air-conditioned luxury trailer parked directly behind the main stage. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind us, instantly cutting off the roar of the crowd and the pulsing bass of the event music. The air inside the trailer was freezing. My father was sitting on a leather sofa, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, looking exactly like a judge waiting to deliver a harsh sentence. Dean was standing by a small, polished kitchenette counter. He was not smiling anymore. The charming celebrity facade had completely vanished. Resting on the granite countertop was a thick stack of legal documents. A heavy silver pen lay perfectly aligned next to the paper. "Sit down, Charlie," my father commanded, motioning his chin toward the chair opposite the counter. I ignored the chair and remained standing, planting my feet firmly into the carpet. Dean picked up the heavy stack of papers and dropped them closer to the edge of the counter. "Right in front of me. We have a slight administrative hurdle we need to clear up before I walk out there and claim the stadium bid," Dean said, his voice stripped of all its public warmth, reduced to a cold, transactional buzz. "The city board is doing a final compliance sweep on Monday morning. We need you to sign this internal correction addendum right now." I looked down at the top page. It was a master waiver. It was a legally binding document designed to retroactively verify my employment as their director of ethics. By signing it, I would be legally confirming that I had actively reviewed, approved, and authorized every single falsified payroll ledger, every fake safety certification, and every forged municipal bid submission they had ever filed. They were cornering me in a metal box, minutes before a public broadcast, demanding that I sign my own legal death warrant to legitimize their crimes. "I am not signing that," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to fill every inch of the small trailer. Dean slammed his open hand flat against the granite counter. The silver pen rattled violently. "You are going to pick up that pen, and you are going to sign your name on the dotted line right now," Dean hissed, leaning his upper body across the counter, his face flushed with sudden vicious anger. "Listen to me very carefully. If you sign this document, we walk out of this trailer together as a united front. We take the stage. We secure the regional monopoly. And you get to play the returning hero for the cameras. But if you refuse, if you try to walk out that door and ruin the biggest moment of my life, I swear I will absolutely destroy you." He paused, letting the silence suffocate the room, making sure I understood the absolute gravity of his threat. "I will walk out there alone," Dean continued, his voice dropping into a sinister, calculated rhythm. "I will stand at that podium and I will tell every reporter and city official in the county that my little sister suffered a massive mental breakdown from the stress of her doctoral program. I will tell them you became severely paranoid, delusional, and obsessed with sabotaging the family that paid for your education. I will paint you as a bitter, unstable academic who lost her grip on reality. By the time I am done talking, no university, no corporate integrity lab, and no government agency will ever hire you again. You will be a complete joke in your own industry. The air in the trailer felt incredibly heavy, thick with the intoxicating arrogance of people who had never faced a single consequence in their entire lives. They fully expected me to break. They expected the old version of Charlie to emerge. They wanted me to burst into tears, to scream about fairness, to succumb to the overwhelming pressure of family loyalty and the sheer terror of public humiliation. I did absolutely none of those things. I reached out, my hand perfectly steady, and picked up the heavy silver pen. My mother exhaled a sharp, triumphant sigh of relief, her shoulders dropping. My father uncrossed his arms, a smug look of satisfaction washing over his face. Dean smirked, thoroughly validated by his own ruthless dominance, believing he had successfully crushed the last ounce of my rebellion. I did not uncap the pen. I simply rolled it between my fingers for a second, then set it back down on the granite counter, exactly half an inch away from the paper. "This is a 70-page legal document," I said, my tone as placid, unbothered, and cold as a frozen lake. "I am not signing anything blindly under pressure. I need to read every single page carefully to ensure the terminology properly aligns with standard municipal compliance codes." I picked up the thick stack of papers, ignoring Dean's sudden glare of impatience, and walked over to the small corner booth at the back of the trailer. I slid into the leather seat and placed the fraudulent documents flat on the table. Turning my body slightly to block their line of sight, I opened my purse and pulled out my phone. I kept the device completely shielded beneath the edge of the table. I opened my encrypted messaging application. Marcus was pinned at the very top of my contact list. My thumbs flew across the digital keyboard, typing a single, rapid sentence. "They just tried to force me to sign live at the scene. Move now." I hit send. I slid the phone back into the dark depths of my purse, pulled the first page of their monumental lie toward me, and began to read the text, sitting in absolute silence as the final countdown to their destruction reached 0. The heavy bass of the introductory music vibrated through the floorboards of the stage. The convention center arena was packed to absolute capacity. Thousands of attendees, local politicians, and regional investors erupted into applause as my brother strode out from behind the velvet curtains. He was bathing in the blinding white spotlights, waving to the roaring crowd like a conquering hero. My parents followed closely behind him, their faces stretched into identical, triumphant smiles. I walked out last, instructed to stand slightly to the side, the silent, compliant academic prop they needed to complete their masterpiece of deception. Dean approached the center podium. He gripped the edges of the wooden stand, lowering his head for a brief moment to feign overwhelming gratitude. When he looked back up, his face was the picture of humble, hard-working American success. "Thank you, Belmere," Dean shouted into the microphone, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Today is a monumental day for the Mendoza family. We are not just announcing the acquisition of the city stadium catering rights. We are announcing a new era of community partnership. And I could not have reached this peak without the unwavering support of my flesh and blood standing right beside me." He extended his arm toward our parents, and then toward me. The crowd cheered louder. The investors in the front row nodded approvingly. Dean took a deep breath, preparing to launch into the core of his presentation, ready to solidify the lies that would make him a millionaire. He never got to speak his next sentence. From the absolute back of the exhibition hall, a series of heavy metal doors crashed open. The sound was so violently loud, it cut through the residual applause like a gunshot. The house lights, previously dimmed to highlight the stage, suddenly snapped to full, glaring brightness. Marching straight down the central aisle was not a group of late-arriving VIP guests. It was a coordinated, rapidly moving column of men and women wearing austere business suits and dark windbreakers. Emblazoned across the backs of those jackets in bright yellow lettering were the acronyms of the State Department of Labor, the Municipal Contract Integrity Unit, and the Regional Insurance Fraud Bureau. They were flanked by 3 uniformed city police officers. The atmosphere in the massive room mutated instantly. The celebratory cheering died in the throats of the audience, replaced by a confused, echoing murmur. The lead investigator, a tall woman with steel-gray hair, did not break her stride until she reached the base of the stage. She bypassed the temporary stairs entirely and vaulted herself onto the platform. Holding a thick, legally binding injunction directly in her hand. Two of her federal agents sprinted toward the back of the stage, heading straight for the luxury trailer where the unsigned, retroactive compliance documents were still sitting on the granite counter. "Cut the audio feed," the lead investigator commanded, pointing sharply at the panicked sound engineer in the side booth. The background music died instantly. She walked straight up to Dean, snatching the microphone from his suddenly paralyzed hand. She did not lower her voice. She addressed the entire auditorium, speaking with the cold, devastating authority of the law. "Dean Mendoza and the executive officers of Ember and Oak Regional Catering," she announced, her voice booming across the stunned crowd. "By order of the Municipal Integrity Commission and the State Labor Board, this event is permanently halted. All pending city contracts awarded to this entity are frozen immediately. Pending a full-scale criminal audit." Dean stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. "What is this? You cannot do this. We have a permit. We are a family business." "You are a fraudulent enterprise," the investigator countered sharply. Before hundreds of shocked witnesses, she began listing the charges. "We have seized irrefutable evidence of systematic wage theft, the submission of fabricated employee training declarations, and the illegal manipulation of municipal grant funds. Furthermore, you are being investigated for the unauthorized theft and deployment of academic credentials to deceive the city council." Down in the press pit, the investigative journalist Marcus had contacted earlier gave a sharp nod to the visual technician she had bribed an hour before the show. The massive digital jumbotron suspended above the stage suddenly flickered. The corporate logo of Ember and Oak vanished. In its place, two massive images appeared side by side. On the right was the glorious, professionally printed promotional poster they had hung over the convention doors, declaring me the doctor behind their People First promise. On the left was the raw, unedited screenshot taken directly from the university graduation livestream. The timestamps were clearly visible. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the thousands of people standing in the hall. The visual proof was absolute. The investors sitting in the front row, the men wearing expensive suits who had just been clapping for Dean, suddenly began looking at each other in sheer horror. Several of them immediately pulled out their cell phones, frantically dialing their legal teams to sever ties before the fallout hit the morning papers. Dean turned around and saw the screens. His charming, rugged persona completely disintegrated. He looked like a trapped animal. His eyes darted around the stage, finally landing on me. The realization of exactly who had detonated the bomb finally pierced his monumental arrogance. He lunged toward me, his face twisted in absolute fury, spit flying from his lips. "You did this," Dean screamed, his voice raw and echoing without the microphone. "You destroyed your own flesh and blood. You burned down everything I built. And for what? Because you were crying over a missed barbecue. Because Mom and Dad did not sit in a stupid chair for 2 hours. You ruined this family over a plate of ribs." His desperate, vicious scream was meant to shame me, but it achieved the exact opposite. His words echoed out into the dead silence of the hall. In his blind rage, Dean had just handed the entire crowd the missing context. The audience, the reporters, the former employees standing in the back, they all suddenly understood exactly where the poison in this family had originated. I did not flinch. I did not back away. I walked slowly toward the center podium. I reached out and gently took the microphone from the hands of the lead investigator. I did not yell. I did not cry. My voice was steady, resonant, and completely devoid of the fear that had chained me to them for 29 years. "The day I earned my degree, you abandoned me to go grill meat," I said, looking directly into my brother's terrified eyes. "Then, you took that exact same degree and sold it to secure more contracts." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of an entire empire collapsing into dust. I turned my head. My mother was standing near the velvet curtain, completely frozen, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror she had never experienced. She realized, in that agonizing second, that her social standing in Belmere was permanently obliterated. My father's reaction was even more visceral. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple as he watched the lead representative of his primary lending bank stand up from the front row, shake his head in disgust, and walk briskly toward the exit. The realization that their massive lines of credit were going to be recalled by Monday morning hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and he collapsed heavily into a folding chair, burying his face in his rough, calloused hands. The aftermath over the next few months was relentless. There was no triumphant, cinematic return to the barbecue pit for the Mendoza family. Ember and Oak lost every single expansion opportunity. They were hit with a massive class action lawsuit, filed by dozens of former employees demanding their stolen overtime pay. The state launched a comprehensive forensic audit that stripped away their remaining assets. Dean, the man who had desperately wanted to be a regional icon, finally got his wish. His face was plastered across every local news broadcast, but only as the disgraced poster boy for corporate family corruption. I did not celebrate their destruction with loud parties or vindictive social media posts. The vengeance was complete, and I was entirely finished looking backward. I used the substantial legal settlement I received for the unauthorized commercial use of my identity, combined with the new, formidable reputation I had secured in the compliance industry, to build something real. I founded the Clear Apron Initiative. It was a fully funded, non-profit program based out of Colorado, dedicated exclusively to supporting vulnerable food service workers. We provided free legal counsel for wage theft, transparent payroll auditing, and a secure whistleblower protection network for those trapped in the shadows of abusive hospitality empires. Nearly a year after the stage collapsed in Belmere, I received a handwritten letter forwarded through my attorney. It was from my mother. The handwriting was shaky, stripped of its usual demanding flourish. She wrote that the house felt incredibly empty. She wrote that she wanted to sit down, share a meal, and talk as a family again. I sat at my desk, looking out over the snow-capped mountains of my new home. I took out a piece of heavy professional stationery and wrote my reply. It was exactly one sentence long. I told her I would only ever accept a conversation under one uncompromising condition: there would be no more lies. My name would never again be used to build their brand, and I would never, ever be forced to live in the secondary seats of my own life again. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts on everything that happened. Do not forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people around the world.